From the moment Bryce Young stepped onto an NFL field, something felt off. Not because he lacked confidence or talent or the poise that made him the most celebrated college quarterback of his class, but because the world around him shifted faster than anyone expected. One year he was being hailed as the next great franchise leader, the quarterback who was supposed to rewrite the Carolina Panthers' future. The next year, he was fighting against a narrative he never saw coming, one that questioned everything from his size to his decision-making to whether he should have even been the #1 pick in the first place. And that dramatic swing, that sudden shift in the league's perception, is exactly where his story becomes impossible to ignore. Because Bryce Young wasn't just drafted, he was chosen, anointed, crowned as the safe pick, the high IQ quarterback, the guy you can build a franchise around. Analysts repeated it so often that it practically became NFL scripture. His college tape was dissected like a holy text. His calmness under pressure was praised like a superpower. And every doubt, his height, his frame, the hits he would inevitably take was dismissed with the same confident shrug. He'll figure it out. He always does. But the truth is, the NFL doesn't care about pre-draft praise or glowing scouting reports. The NFL tests you in ways you can never prepare for, and the moment Bryce Young entered that world, the test began. The speed was different. The windows were tighter. The hits were harder. And the pressure, public, organizational, and internal, intensified with every snap he took. Suddenly, the quarterback who once made everything look effortless was fighting for every inch, every read, every second he was allowed to stand upright in the pocket. And while Bryce was learning the league's brutal reality, something else was happening, something he couldn't control. C.J. Stroud was exploding. Every touchdown Stroud threw became another spotlight on Bryce's struggles. Every highlight play in Houston amplified the mistakes being made in Carolina. And every time Stroud pulled off another impossible win, fans didn't just celebrate him, they questioned Bryce. Why didn't Carolina see this coming? Why didn't they choose the quarterback who was now being called a generational talent? And most importantly, who inside the organization pushed for Bryce so hard that they gave up their future to get him? Suddenly, Bryce wasn't fighting defenders. He was fighting a narrative, a whisper that grew louder every week. Maybe the Panthers made the wrong choice. And as the season spiraled into chaos, coaches fired, schemes changed, leaks from the building, those whispers turned into full-blown headlines. People weren't asking if Bryce was struggling because of the team. They were asking if the team was collapsing because of Bryce. But what if the truth is far more complicated? What if Bryce Young never had a real chance to succeed in his rookie year? What if his journey is less about failure and more about survival? If you're enjoying this video and loving the content, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up. It really helps us know what you want to see more of. And why keep all the excitement to yourself? Share this video with your friends, family, or anyone who loves NFL drama. Because behind the scenes, beyond the stats and the criticism, lies a story most fans never heard. A story about pressure, expectations, dysfunction, and one quarterback trying to keep his identity intact inside a storm he never created. And once you understand what really happened, you'll see Bryce Young in a way you never have before. But that's only the beginning. Long before Bryce Young ever held up a Panthers jersey, the NFL world had already decided who he was supposed to be. It wasn't a debate. It wasn't a close call. It was an early coronation. Bryce wasn't treated like a draft prospect. He was treated like a destiny. From the moment Alabama wrapped its season, analysts, scouts, and insiders across the league started repeating the same message with absolute certainty. Bryce Young is QB1. Everyone else is fighting for second place. And when a narrative forms that quickly, it becomes almost impossible to escape. What made it even stranger was how early this certainty formed. Months before the combine, months before pro days, months before teams had fully broken down film on the other quarterbacks, Bryce's name was already written in ink at the top of big boards. Not pencil, ink. People spoke about him like a player who'd already proven himself on NFL fields. Every draft show, every insider podcast, every mock draft treated Bryce not as an option, but as the conclusion. There was almost a sense of peer pressure in the scouting world. If you didn't put Bryce at #1, you looked uninformed or worse, like you did get it. And because of that, Every other quarterback in the class, Stroud, Richardson, Levis, was talked about with qualifiers. Stroud was accurate, but Richardson was athletic, but Levis looked the part, but Bruss somehow had no but. His positives were magnified and his weaknesses were softened. Even his size, something that had been a massive concern for years, was brushed aside with lines like, "He's been small his whole life and it never stopped him." That became the shield everyone used whenever reality tried to sneak into the conversation. Teams felt the pressure too. Front offices hated the idea of being the one organization that doubted the sure thing. Nobody wanted to be the team that let the next Drew Brees or Russ Wilson slip through their fingers. And once the Panthers traded up for the #1 pick, the pressure hit an entirely new level. Suddenly, the entire league expected them to take Bruss. Anything else would have been considered a shock or even a mistake. Even insiders reported that ownership, coaching staff, and scouts didn't all agree at first, but the momentum was so strong that it almost didn't matter. The wave of belief in Bruss was too powerful to push against. What got lost in that wave was the truth that pre-draft hype can be a trap. When a player is destiny-stamped before he even enters the league, expectations stop being realistic. They become mythological. Bruss wasn't just expected to succeed. He was expected to validate years of praise from the entire draft community. He was stepping into the NFL not as a rookie learning a new world, but as someone expected to carry a franchise on day one. And that's the kind of pressure that doesn't just weigh on a quarterback. It reshapes everything around him. But the real twist came next. Because what looked perfect on paper didn't look the same once Bruss actually stepped into the league. On paper, Bruss Young looked like the kind of quarterback scouts dream about. Not because he had the biggest arm or the strongest frame, but because he had the one thing every evaluator insists they can't teach: control. Bruss didn't just play quarterback, he orchestrated games. At Alabama, he moved defenders with his eyes, anticipated openings before receivers even made their breaks, and turned chaos into highlight reels. He had the calmness of a veteran and the creativity of a backyard quarterback who never lost a duel. And when you watch a player like that dominate one of the toughest conferences in college football, it becomes easy to believe he's built for Sundays. Scouts circled 3 traits in bold every time his name came up. First was his anticipation. Bruss didn't wait for receivers to get open, he threw them open. He had that rare ability to see defenses not as static alignments, but as moving machines whose weak points he could exploit. Second was his poise. Even when the pocket collapsed, his heartbeat didn't seem to change. He avoided pressure with a step, a slide, a subtle movement that made defenders miss by inches. Third was his decision-making. He rarely forced throws. He trusted his reads, trusted his mechanics, and trusted the offense around him. It was the kind of discipline coaches beg for in their quarterbacks. Then came the intangibles, the magic word that took his evaluation from first-round pick to can't-miss prospect. Coaches praised his leadership. Teammates talked about his maturity. Analysts said he processed defenses faster than quarterbacks with twice his experience. And every week at Alabama only reinforced that belief. Whenever the team needed a big play, Bruss delivered. Whenever the moment got heavy, he elevated. It built this narrative that he wasn't just a talent, he was a stabilizer. Even the weaknesses on his scouting report felt small compared to the strengths. Yes, he was undersized. Yes, the hits at the next level would be different. But people countered those concerns with examples of other outliers who survived and thrived. Drew Brees wasn't big. Russ Wilson wasn't big. Kyler Murray wasn't big. So why couldn't Bruss be the next name added to that list? The league wanted to believe his mind and mechanics would compensate for whatever he lacked physically. And it didn't stop there. Alabama's system polished him. The timing routes, the spacing, the structure, it all played to Bruss's strengths. He had clean pockets, elite receivers, and a coaching staff that understood exactly how to maximize his skill set. So when teams watched him carve up SEC defenses, many assumed his game would translate seamlessly. They saw a quarterback playing with rhythm, confidence, and surgical accuracy, and ignored the question that mattered most. What happens when the structure supporting him isn't perfect? That's the part of the evaluation that slipped through the cracks. The draft community focused so much on the traits they loved that they treated every concern like background noise. And once enough people agreed Bruss was a future star, nobody wanted to be the person who doubted it. But the NFL doesn't care about scouting reports, and once Bruss took his first snaps, the gap between on paper and on the field became impossible to ignore. Long before Bruss Young ever walked into the Panthers' facility, the franchise was already in a fragile place. They weren't just looking for a quarterback, they were looking for an identity. Years of failed experiments, rebuilding phases that never quite rebuilt anything, veterans who weren't the answer, coaches who didn't fit, left the organization scrambling for anything that could finally flip the narrative. And when a team gets desperate, decisions start coming from emotion, not logic. That's exactly where Carolina was when they pushed their chips to the center of the table and traded everything for the number 1 pick. It wasn't a calm, calculated move. It was a franchise saying, "We can't keep waiting," even though the rest of the foundation wasn't in place. Before they even knew who they were drafting, they gave up premium picks, key players, and basically handed Chicago the keys to their future. It was a bold swing, but also a risky one, because when a team trades that much, they're not just looking for a quarterback. They're looking for salvation. Inside the building, the decision wasn't nearly as unified as it appeared publicly. Rumors started floating that the coaching staff didn't all agree on which quarterback they wanted. Some scouts reportedly preferred C.J. Stroud's accuracy and pro-ready style. Others wanted Anthony Richardson's upside. And then there were whispers that ownership had a strong preference for Bryce from the start. When those tensions exist at the top of a franchise, it creates a pressure cooker effect. People stop evaluating prospects objectively. They start aligning with whichever side they think will win. So while the public narrative made it seem like the Panthers always knew Bryce was their guy, behind the scenes it looked a lot messier. Meetings dragged on. Opinions clashed. And the more divided the evaluations became, the more the organization leaned into the idea of Bryce being the safe pick, the one who was polished, mentally advanced, and able to step in quickly. That label became a shield that covered up deeper problems. Because the truth was, the Panthers weren't ready for a rookie quarterback. Their offensive line was inconsistent. Their wide receiver room lacked a true game changer. Their coaching staff, brand new and still learning how to work together, hadn't even finalized their offensive identity. And yet, they were about to hand all of that over to a first-year quarterback who was expected to elevate everything from day one. It wasn't just unrealistic, it was reckless.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button.
But desperation makes front offices believe in shortcuts. Instead of building a strong structure first, Carolina gambled that Bryce could be the foundation and the fixer. They convinced themselves that once they landed their quarterback, everything else would fall into place. And with the weight of an expensive trade on their shoulders, they needed that belief to be true. The problem? When you build your entire future on one player before the rest of the system is ready, you're not setting that player up to succeed. You're throwing him into a storm. And as soon as Bryce took the field, that storm hit fast and exposed every weakness the Panthers tried to hide. The moment Bryce Young stepped into his first NFL game, the truth hit harder than any scouting critique ever could. College football might prepare you for pressure, for crowds, for expectations, but nothing prepares you for the speed of the NFL. Suddenly, the windows that looked wide at Alabama were barely cracks. The pockets that used to last 3 full seconds were collapsing in less than 2. Every defender he faced was faster, stronger, smarter, and far more disciplined than anyone he'd ever seen on a college field. And for the first time in his football life, Bryce looked overwhelmed. The NFL isn't just quicker, it's unforgiving. When a quarterback hesitates for even half a second, the entire play falls apart. In college, Bryce could create magic by slipping away from pressure or buying extra time with his mobility. In the NFL, those same moves turned into dangerous gambles. Edge rushers closed on him like missiles. Linebackers didn't bite on his fakes. Defensive backs recovered in the blink of an eye. Everything Bryce used to do instinctively suddenly required twice the speed and triple the strength. And the hits were different. At Alabama, Bryce rarely faced clean shots. His line protected him, his spacing was perfect, and his receivers created natural separation that made his job manageable. In Carolina, he didn't have that luxury. The pocket collapsed around him like a trap. Defensive linemen wrapped him up easily. Plays that used to be routine became survival drills. When Bryce held onto the ball a second too long, which he could get away with in college, NFL defenders punished him. This was where his size, long dismissed by scouts and analysts, became a real issue. Not because he lacked toughness. Bryce is one of the toughest players in his class, but because physics is physics. He couldn't absorb hits like bigger quarterbacks. He couldn't shrug off sacks. Even routine pressure altered his mechanics. For the first time, defenders were able to disrupt him physically, not just mentally. And as that pressure increased, Bryce's timing, his greatest strength, started to slip. Suddenly, throws he made with ease in college came out a beat late. Passes that used to float perfectly into tight windows sailed just a little too far or came up just a little short. And once the confidence in his rhythm disappeared, everything else unraveled. That's the part fans never see. A quarterback's game isn't just about skill, it's about trust. Trust in his line, trust in his reads, trust in his own instincts. But when the environment around him collapses, that trust disintegrates. And Bryce felt that collapse every week. He rarely had time to breathe, much less operate a rhythm-based offense. His footwork sped up, his eyes dropped under pressure, and his anticipation, a trait that once separated him, turned into hesitation. But the hardest part? This wasn't only about Bryce. His struggles were magnified by something far bigger, what was happening around him in Carolina. Because just as Bryce was learning the NFL's brutal truth, another storm was forming, and it wasn't coming from defenses. It was coming from inside his own organization. If Bryce Young had entered the NFL alone, without any direct comparison, without another rookie lighting up the league, his struggles might have been viewed differently. Fans might have blamed the offensive line, the coaching turnover, the lack of weapons. Analysts might have preached patience, reminding everyone that rookie quarterbacks often stumble before they shine. But Bryce didn't enter the league alone. He entered it alongside C.J. Stroud, and that changed everything. While Bryce was fighting for seconds of breathing room behind a collapsing pocket, Stroud was turning Houston into one of the most shocking stories in recent NFL history. Every week, he delivered something that made people stop and pay attention: deep strikes, flawless timing, impossible poise for a rookie. Instead of looking like a player learning the league, Stroud looked like he had been built for it. His confidence, his decision-making, his presence, it all clicked instantly. And each highlight Stroud created didn't just elevate his reputation, it amplified Bryce's struggles. Suddenly the conversation was Bryce needs time. It was why doesn't Bryce look like this? Fans across the league started comparing every throw, every drive, every stat. Even people who rarely watched Panthers football began questioning how Carolina chose one quarterback while Houston landed the other. Inside Carolina, those comparisons weren't silent. Reports started surfacing that some members of the coaching staff had preferred Stroud during the pre-draft process. Rumors claimed the organization wasn't unified during the evaluation, and that certain voices in the building felt ignored. Whether those claims were fully accurate or not, it didn't matter. The perception alone ignited debate. And perception in the NFL is powerful. Suddenly, Bryce wasn't just a struggling rookie. He was the rookie picked instead of the star breaking records in Houston. Every interception he threw became a bigger headline because Stroud wasn't throwing them. Every missed read became an example of why Carolina got it wrong. The pressure didn't grow gradually, it erupted. For Bryce, that created an impossible situation. He wasn't just battling defenses anymore. He was battling expectations shaped by someone else's success. He couldn't control Stroud's rise, yet every step Stroud took towards superstardom became another shadow cast over Bryce's rookie season. And the more the gap widened, the more fans began to question everything Carolina did. By midseason, the storyline had completely flipped. When Bryce struggled, people didn't ask why. They assumed they already knew the answer. They should have drafted Stroud. And that oversimplified narrative took on a life of its own. It ignored Carolina's lack of weapons. It ignored the coaching instability. It ignored the collapsing offensive structure around him. But narratives don't need fairness to become popular. They just need momentum. And Stroud had all the momentum in the world. He won games that nobody expected. He outplayed veteran quarterbacks. He looked calm, in control, and ready. Meanwhile, Bryce looked like he was still trying to find stable ground on a team that couldn't give him any. It created a contrast so dramatic that fans stopped seeing context and started seeing only results. But Stroud's rise didn't just change public perception. It exposed deeper problems inside Carolina, problems that were about to erupt in ways nobody saw coming. By the time the season reached its breaking point, Bryce Young's struggles were no longer just a quarterback problem. They were a mirror reflecting everything wrong inside the Panthers organization. What fans saw on Sundays was only the surface. Behind the scenes, the foundation was cracking in every direction. Systems weren't stable. Coaches weren't aligned. And the franchise that believed it had found its future quarterback was suddenly fighting just to keep the season from falling apart. The first major red flag came when the offensive coaching staff began changing things week to week. Instead of building a consistent identity around Bryce, the Panthers were scrambling for answers. Playbooks shifted. Terminology changed. Concepts were added, removed, then added again. One week, they emphasized quick passes. The next, they wanted deeper shots. Nothing had continuity, and for a rookie quarterback trying to adjust to NFL speed, inconsistency is poison. Players noticed. Reporters noticed. And eventually, the front office could no longer hide it. Mid-season, the Panthers fired their offensive coordinator, an admission that the entire plan for Bryce had been flawed from day one. But instead of stabilizing things, the firing made everything feel even more chaotic. A new play caller stepped in, but the system remained the same patchwork experiment it had been all year. Bryce wasn't learning an offense. He was learning a new offense every week. And while the coaching staff scrambled, the roster around Bryce wasn't doing him any favors. Carolina didn't have a true WR1 who could create separation or bail him out when plays broke down. Their run game was inconsistent. Their protection was shaky. Every snap Bryce took felt like it came with a countdown clock that hit zero faster than any quarterback could reasonably process. Inside the building, frustration grew. Anonymous leaks surfaced about poor communication between offensive coaches. Rumors suggested certain staff members didn't feel Bryce was being put in positions to succeed. Others claimed the scheme wasn't tailored to his strengths because the staff didn't fully agree on what those strengths even were. When a franchise is divided about its quarterback, nothing functions smoothly. Fans started asking the question no organization wants to hear. Is Bryce struggling because of the team, or is the team struggling because of Bryce? But anyone paying attention could see the truth. Carolina wasn't giving him a fair chance. A rookie quarterback needs structure, consistency, and support. Bryce got the opposite. He was trying to run an offense that didn't know what it wanted to be, behind a line that couldn't hold long enough to breathe, with receivers who couldn't create the windows his game was built on. The Panthers didn't just fail to develop Bryce. They made him the scapegoat for problems that existed long before he arrived. And while Carolina was falling deeper into dysfunction, something else started brewing on the outside. A new quarterback was entering the league with more hype, more swagger, and more expectations than Bryce ever had. Because just as the Panthers' chaos reached its peak, the rise of Caleb Williams began, and his arrival changed the entire conversation about Bryce Young yet again. As the Panthers' internal dysfunction spread like wildfire, a new narrative took over the national spotlight, one that added yet another layer of pressure Bryce Young could never escape. Caleb Williams, the most electrifying quarterback prospect in years, stepped into the league with a gravitational pull that shifted every conversation, every headline, and every expectation. And whether Bryce liked it or not, his name kept getting dragged into the wake of Caleb's rise. Caleb was everything the NFL media machine dreamt about: flashy, confident, creative, unpredictable, and dangerous with the ball in his hands. He came in as the centerpiece of a full-blown franchise reset, new coaches, new roster construction, a franchise ready to rebuild around him from day one. Bryce never had that luxury. He was thrown into chaos and told to figure it out. But in the headlines, nuance didn't matter. Comparisons did. As Caleb dominated early storylines, training camp highlights, preseason flashes, bold quotes, the national pressure wave started. Suddenly, analysts weren't simply evaluating Caleb. They were using him as the benchmark Bryce was supposed to meet. Shows asked the same question on loop. If Caleb Williams is doing this already, what happened with Bryce Young? Caleb's hype wasn't normal rookie attention. It was a cultural moment. Networks wanted a superstar. Fans wanted a savior. And teams wanted to believe he was the next generational quarterback. He didn't even have to play a regular season snap before being crowned the future face of the league. Social media exploded with clips of him making off-platform throws, insane scrambles, and highlight reel plays that made it look like he had mastered the NFL before he ever stepped on the field. Every one of those clips became indirect pressure on Bryce. Because Panthers fans, already frustrated, already questioning their franchise's direction, began imagining the impossible. What if we had waited for Caleb? What if Bryce is good, but Caleb is special? What if we picked the wrong guy? Even though the comparison wasn't fair, perception became reality. Then came the moment that sent the pressure wave into overdrive, the early season games where Caleb actually delivered. He extended plays. He created magic. He turned broken structures into touchdowns. And with every highlight Caleb produced, the spotlight on Bryce grew harsh, unforgiving, and cold. Sports talk shows started running segments with side-by-side graphics, Caleb's production next to Bryce's struggles. Journalists wrote columns that subtly implied Carolina's coaches would love a do-over. Fans flooded comment sections with frustration. Everything that was going wrong in Carolina suddenly felt magnified by everything that was going right elsewhere. This wasn't Bryce versus Caleb by choice. It was Bryce versus Caleb because the NFL needed a storyline, and the Panthers gave them the perfect stage. And as Caleb's momentum grew, Bryce found himself trapped in a narrative he didn't create. One where Caleb wasn't just the new star. He was the measuring stick Bryce Young was now forced to be judged against. But the real breaking point was still ahead, because Caleb's rise didn't just reshape media narratives, it reshaped the Panthers' entire future. For Bryce Young, the noise had become deafening. Every headline, every comparison, every disappointed fan tweet, every national talk show segment questioning whether Carolina had already ruined him. But this is where Bryce's story takes a turn most people didn't see coming, not because the circumstances magically improved, but because Bryce himself refused to break. Redemption for Bryce wasn't going to come from some overnight transformation or a miracle scheme change. It began in the quiet moments, long before the cameras rolled. The early mornings when he'd show up before coaches arrived. The late nights staying in the facility while teammates headed home. The film sessions where he wasn't just studying opponents. He was studying himself, tearing down every flaw, every mechanical lapse, every hesitation that crept into his rookie season. Despite the chaos around him, Bryce remained who he had always been, calm, surgical, unflappable. The kid who dominated at Alabama didn't disappear, he just got buried under dysfunction. And slowly, piece by piece, he started digging himself out. Carolina brought in new offensive minds, people who wanted to build around Bryce instead of forcing him into a system that never fit. For the first time, he felt heard. Receivers got separation. The line got reinforcements. Play designs finally created windows instead of forcing desperation. With structure came confidence, and with confidence came flashes of the quarterback scouts fell in love with. He began throwing with anticipation again. He regained control at the line of scrimmage. He extended plays not because he was running for his life, but because he was playing freely. The league took notice, not because the Panthers were suddenly contenders, but because Bryce was visibly different, stronger, faster with his decisions, more comfortable dictating pace. Analysts who once doubted him started acknowledging the progress. Opposing defenses began respecting him more. And fans, who had spent months venting frustration, finally started seeing the promise that had once made him the #1 pick. But redemption isn't just about improvement, it's about resilience. Bryce wasn't just trying to fix mechanics. He was trying to rewrite a national narrative that said he was a bust before he ever had a fair chance. Every week became a referendum. Every mistake, a headline. Every good throw, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, Carolina didn't draft the wrong guy after all. What truly fueled him wasn't proving the haters wrong, but proving the believers right. The coaches who vouched for him, the teammates who defended him, the fans who stayed loyal despite the storm, and deep down, proving to himself that he still belonged among the league's future stars. By the end of this chapter, Bryce hadn't completed his redemption story, but he had started one. And that was enough. Because the Bryce Young the NFL saw now wasn't the overwhelmed rookie or the victim of organizational chaos. It was a quarterback rebuilt through adversity, sharpened by doubt, and driven by something stronger than hype. The hunger to show the world exactly why he was chosen first, and why his story is far from finished. By the time Bryce Young reached this point in his journey, the conversation around him had completely shifted. Not because he had silenced every critic or turned the Panthers into overnight contenders, but because something had changed in the air. The kid who once looked overwhelmed by the weight of being the #1 pick now carried himself with a different kind of energy. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even triumphant. It was something far more dangerous to those who doubted him. Confidence born from surviving the fire. The league started noticing the small things, the quicker reads, the sharper footwork, the way he stood taller in the pocket, not physically, but mentally, refusing to let chaos dictate his rhythm anymore. There were glimpses, moments where you could almost see the player scouts had envisioned. Calm under pressure, precise, almost unnervingly poised. The Panthers weren't fixed, not even close, but Bryce had become unshakable in a way that made people rethink the narrative they had been clinging to for months. And that's what made this moment so intriguing. Because just as Bryce began rewriting his story, the NFL landscape around him started shifting again. A new wave of quarterbacks entered the league, bigger, louder, hyped beyond belief. Caleb Williams, Drake May, rising college stars generating buzz before they even took a snap in the pros. Suddenly, Bryce wasn't just fighting his past, he was fighting the future. The pressure wasn't fading, it was mutating into something new. Carolina's front office faced its own crossroads. Should they build everything around Bryce and finally commit to a real long-term plan? Or were whispers true, that the franchise was considering a massive reset if things didn't turn quickly? New coaches, new systems, maybe even a new face of the franchise. The same instability that once derailed Bryce could become the very thing that determines whether his comeback is cemented or cut short. Fans felt the tension too. Every game became a referendum. Every drive, a test. Every win or loss, a data point in a much bigger question. Was Bryce Young truly becoming the quarterback Carolina believed he could be, or was this just a temporary spark before reality came crashing back down? Because here's the part most people overlook. Redemption stories don't move in straight lines. They twist. They stall. They tease you with hope before throwing you back into uncertainty. And that's exactly where Bryce's journey now lives, right on the edge of something potentially incredible or heartbreakingly familiar. As the season looms, one thing is clear. Bryce Young has changed. He's tougher. He's sharper. He's finally stepping into the role that was once too heavy to carry. But the NFL doesn't care about personal growth. It only cares about results. And the next few months will determine everything: his legacy, his place in the league, and whether Carolina's gamble will be remembered as bold or disastrous. So as the lights come up on this chapter of Bryce Young's story, the question hangs in the air, heavier than ever. Is this the beginning of his rise, or the calm before another storm?
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.